Penguin Random House Audio presents The Night the Lights Went Out by Karen White. Read for you by Carolyn Cook, Susan Larkin, and Tiffany Morgan. The Playing Fields Blog. Observations of Suburban Life from Sweet Apple, Georgia. Written by your neighbor. Installment number 1. A Plague of Bulldozers and White Escalades. A woman at my hair salon today asked me where I'd learned to put on makeup. I considered this a compliment, having always taken good care of my skin for the sole purpose of making it a smooth palette on which to put makeup. I could tell she was a transplant to our North Atlanta suburb of Sweet Apple by her accent and by her question. Every true Southern mama teaches her daughter about makeup. I think in some parts of the Deep South, like the Mississippi Delta, girls are born with makeup brushes clutched in their tiny hands. This might be hearsay, but have you ever noticed how many Miss Americas are from Mississippi? She asked me to say a few words for her, like honey and fiddly-dee and damn, to hear my accent, and then actually asked if I'd ever heard of the hanging of an innocent man around these parts. I had the sudden and horrible thought that those who aren't from around here might think that Gone with the Wind or that song about the night the lights went out in Georgia were true compasses showing what they might discover here in Sweet Apple. That's when I decided I needed to write a blog, a sort of tutorial or map for the newcomers here. A way for them to educate themselves on the ways of the South and its natives before they do something heinous like wear white pants after Labor Day or show up at a funeral without a chafing dish full of Southern comfort food. Just like all polite Southern conversations, this one, I thought, should start with the weather. For those newcomers who haven't yet experienced what we locals refer to as the furnace, the heat of a Georgia summer arrives suddenly. The cicadas begin their whirring song in the trees as a sort of advance warning, and by the time the tree frogs begin burping in unison, summer is here. But if you live in one of our new neighborhoods, you won't be able to hear the cicadas or the frogs because of the incessant thumping of your neighbor's HVAC systems, rumbling all day long like an endless shouting match. I'd like to suggest turning off the air conditioning in the evenings when it's cooler, to hear yourselves think for a change. Hear the voices of your neighbors even. It's easy to think we all live in our own air-conditioned bubbles, but we don't. We have to share our breathing space with our neighbors. And don't forget, we're all supposed to love our neighbors no matter how difficult they sometimes make it. Like when they vote to bulldoze another farm, or park in the fire lane at Kroger, or tailgate me in their white Escalade. Sometimes it's a Mercedes or BMW SUV and even the occasional Honda, but it's always white. Even when I'm going the speed limit. Being late for a chemical peel does not give you the right to tailgate, no matter how uneven your skin tone. It's not very neighborly. Yes, we're supposed to love our neighbors. Yet I still can't shake my daydreams where I come up with 1,000 different ways in which I can make some of them disappear. Permanently. Thank heavens they're just daydreams. 1. Merilee. Sweet Apple, Georgia, 2016. If there was one thing that Merilee Talbot Dunlap had learned in 11 years of marriage, it was the simple fact that you could live with a person for a long time and never really know him. That it was easy to accept the mask he wore as the real thing, happy in your oblivion, until one day the mask slipped. Or, as in Merilee's case, when it fell off completely and you were forced to face your own complicity in the masquerade.
No, she knew she hadn't made Michael have an affair with their daughter's third-grade math teacher, but she had allowed herself never to question any discrepancies in her marriage, content in her role as suburban wife and mother, until the props and scenery were pulled away and she was asked to exit stage right. "Mommy?" Merilee turned toward her 10-year-old daughter, Lily, blonde and fine-boned like her father, but with a perpetually worried expression that was all her mother's. It seemed Lily already had a permanent furrow between her brows from the worry she'd been born with. The last months since the divorce, and the stress from the upcoming move, hadn't helped. "Yes?" "What if I don't meet any friends in my new school? And what if I don't have anybody to sit with at lunchtime? And I'm thinking I shouldn't be in the accelerated English class, because what if I'm not smart enough?" Merilee carefully snapped down the lid of the plastic container she'd been filling with her collection of old maps. She'd been collecting them since she was a little girl, when she'd been in an antiquarian bookstore with her grandfather, and he'd shown her an ink-drawn map. It had sketches of horses and cows and fences, and a cozy log cabin with smoke curling from its lone chimney. "That's where you live," he'd said, pointing to the cabin. It looked nothing like the white-columned brick house in Sandersville, Georgia she lived in all her life, and she had told him so, only to be made to understand that the cabin and everything around it had been plowed under to make room for her house and their neighbors' houses in the 20s, when he and Grandma weren't even born yet. For a long time it had given her nightmares, thinking she could hear the cries of the people from the cabin, not completely sure they'd been removed before the demolition. It scared her to think of how temporary things could be. How your life, your house, your family could be erased like a sand castle at the beach. And when her little brother had died, she'd known for sure. Her grandfather had bought her the map, unaware he was fostering what would become a lifelong obsession. Merilee wasn't sure whether her love for old maps was because they reminded her of the grandfather she'd loved more than her own parents, or because she'd needed proof that things changed, that no matter how good or bad things were, they were never permanent. Merilee knelt down in front of Lily, silently cursing her ex-husband one more time, as if making her feel extraneous and unwanted weren't bad enough. His inability to keep his pants zipped and his eyes from wandering had added an extra layer of vulnerability to their daughter. Gently holding her bony shoulders, she looked into Lily's pale blue eyes. "You've never had problems making friends. You're a nice person, Lily, and that's why other girls like to include you. Remember that, okay? It's who you are, and if you stick with that, you'll be fine. And Windwood Academy is much smaller than your old school, which is a nice thing when you're the new kid. You'll know everybody in all of your classes pretty quickly. And if they don't like me?" A little bit of the old spark lit her eyes, making Merilee inwardly sigh with relief. "I'm going to make them an offer they can't refuse." Lily laughed her sweet laugh, a sound that evoked champagne bubbles popping, almost eradicating the guilt Merilee felt over having left The Godfather in the DVD player one night. It had been right after she'd learned of Michael's affair, when she'd felt the need to watch violent movies with lots of blood and bad language after the kids had been tucked into bed. Lily had flipped it on the next day, thinking it was The Princess Bride, and in the 5 minutes it had taken for Merilee to realize what was happening, Lily had been exposed to more violence than she had seen in her entire 10 years. After much apologizing and lectures about the difference between movies and real life, it had become a secret joke between them. For weeks, Merilee had watched her daughter for any signs that she might need counseling, glad for once that her daughter had always had the maturity of a 40-year-old rather than that of the young girl she was. Merilee stood, her right knee popping, yet another reminder of why her husband had wanted to trade her in for a younger model. As for the accelerated English class, they put you in there for a reason. You'll do great. And if you find you don't like it, we'll move you. Just give it a
Sample complete. Ready to continue?